Mr. President. I didn't expect to wake up yesterday to the news that the senator from the 22nd District had overnight accused me by name of grooming and sexualizing children in an email fundraising for herself. So I sat on it for a while wondering why me. And then I realized, because I am the biggest threat to your hollow, hateful scheme. Because you can't claim that you are targeting marginalized kids in the name of, quote, parental rights if another parent is standing up to say no. So then what? Then you dehumanize and marginalize me. You say that I'm one of them. You say she's a groomer. She supports pedophilia. She wants children to believe that they were responsible for slavery and to feel bad about themselves because they're white. Well, here's a little bit of background about who I really am. Growing up, my family was very active in our church. I sang in the choir. My mom taught CCD. One day, our priest called a meeting with my mom and told her that she was not living up to the church's expectations and that she was disappointing. My mom asked why. Among other reasons, she was told it was because she was divorced and because the priest didn't see her at Mass every Sunday. So where was my mom on Sundays? She was at the soup kitchen with me. My mom taught me at a very young age that Christianity and faith was about being part of a community, about recognizing our privilege and blessings and doing what we can to be of service to others, especially people who are marginalized, targeted, and who had less, often unfairly. I learned that service was far more important than performative nonsense like being seen in the same pew every Sunday or writing Christian in your Twitter bio and using that as a shield to target and marginalize already marginalized people. I also stand on the shoulders of people like Father Ted Hesburgh, the longtime president of the University of Notre Dame, who was active in the civil rights movement, who recognized his power and privilege as a white man, a faith leader, and the head of an influential and well-respected institution, and who saw black people in this country being targeted and discriminated against and beaten, and reached out to lock arms with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he was alive, when it was unpopular and risky, and marching alongside them to say, "We've got you," to offer protection and service and allyship to try to right the wrongs and fix injustice in the world. So who am I? I am a straight, white, Christian, married, suburban mom who knows that the very notion that learning about slavery or redlining or systemic racism somehow means that children are being taught to feel bad or hate themselves because they are white is absolute nonsense. No child alive today is responsible for slavery. No one in this room is responsible for slavery. But each and every single one of us bears responsibility for writing the next chapter of history. Each and every single one of us decides what happens next and how we respond to history and the world around us. We are not responsible for the past. We also cannot change the past. We can't pretend that it didn't happen or deny people their very right to exist. I am a straight, white, Christian, married, suburban mom. I want my daughter to know that she is loved, supported, and seen for whoever she becomes. I want her to be curious, empathetic, and kind. People who are different are not the reason that our roads are in bad shape after decades of disinvestment, or that healthcare costs are too high, or that teachers are leaving the profession. I want every child in this state to feel seen, heard, and supported, not marginalized and targeted because they are not straight, white, and Christian. We cannot let hateful people tell you otherwise, to scapegoat and deflect from the fact that they are not doing anything to fix the real issues that impact people's lives. And I know that hate will only win if people like me stand by and let it happen. So I want to be very clear right now. Call me whatever you want. I hope you brought in a few dollars. I hope it made you sleep good last night. I know who I am. I know what faith and service means and what it calls for in this moment. We will not let hate win.
Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow responding to a smear by a Republican colleague in a wild fundraising email. Senator McMorrow was accused of being, quote, outraged that she can't groom and sexualize kindergartners or teach that 8-year-olds are responsible for slavery. And the Michigan State Senator McMorrow joins us now. It's great to have you.
Senator, thanks so much for being with us. You know, I've had Democrats ask me for years as a former Republican, what do we do when they say these outrageous things to us? They're just lies. There's no way to respond because the lies are so outrageous. I heard a lot of Democrats last night saying, well, the senator just showed us how to respond. Talk about that moment, leading up to that moment, and whether you had second thoughts before getting before that microphone.
I didn't have any second thoughts. I mean, we have seen this rising trend of hatred and targeting of gay kids and trans kids and Black people. And then they came for me. And it is disgusting and vile. It is a hateful thing for a mother to say about another mother. I am the mom to a 1-year-old, and we have to push back against hateful garbage.
You know what's so interesting, Senator, is that people, as you brought up in your speech yesterday, Republicans always try to make every opponent the other. You're the other. Oh, you must be this or that. And you so effectively in the speech said that I'm a white, Christian, suburban mom who just happens to believe in compassion, who just happens to believe in all the things that you said you believe. And it's so funny that when I have people coming up to me because I oppose Donald Trump, they'll go, oh, I liked you when you used to be conservative. I said, oh, wait, you mean when I supported NATO, when I supported balanced budgets, when I supported gun rights, when I supported, and I just go down the long list. And what's so extraordinary is not only are they performative in their ideology, that it's all about stupid tribalism, they're performative in their Christianity. Some of the most hateful things I've gotten, and I would love for you to talk about this, I'll read a tweet that will just be like one of the most I go, oh, my God, what poor soul wrote this? And then you'll read their bio and be like, Christian, living for the Lord for 47 years. And you're like, well, I'm not so sure that's the Jesus I read about in the Gospels. But you see it every day, don't you?
I do. So I flipped a district when I ran for the first time in 2018. So I represent what was a Republican district. I'm a Democrat. And it is this exact tone that the people I represent Mitt Romney's hometown, want balanced budgets and want the government to work and want us to attract and support businesses and don't want to hate people because they are different. And there was an opportunity for the Republican Party to go back to debating, how we spend tax dollars, but instead it is full fringe QAnon, hateful rhetoric with no actual policy. So, I see it every day. But part of the reason that I really wanted to identify myself is because this moment is going to require straight, white, Christian, suburban moms to stand up and get uncomfortable and say this is not okay, because odds are, a lot of us are probably pretty comfortable and okay, but that doesn't mean that this is okay, and we can't stand back and let it happen.
I'm curious about the senator who made this accusation, and it's ugly, but I mean, we have to say it out loud about what she said about you, that you were upset that kindergartners couldn't be sexualized and that you were a groomer effectively. When you looked directly at Senator Tice yesterday and said what you said, did she look back at you? Because everyone's very tough online on Twitter and fundraising emails. What did she do back? What did she say back?
She said nothing back and couldn't even be bothered to look me in the eye. I looked at the back of her head the entire speech. She turned away from me. And, you know, in part of that fundraising email, she accused me of being an online social media troll. And I have never been one to shy away from saying things to people's face, and she's too much of a coward to even acknowledge my existence.
So what, in your estimation, Senator, has happened? Because Michigan, as you say, you know, Mitt Romney, moderate Republicans, balanced budget, things like that. You know, there were movements within the legislature there to try to overturn the election in your state, unsuccessful, thank goodness, for the country. What has changed in the last few years?
It is this rising extremism, and we've seen this play out with gerrymandering. You know, the fact is Michigan is a very purple state. We vote pretty evenly, Democratic versus Republican, but the legislature, particularly the state Senate, has been Republican controlled since 1984, despite the fact that in 2014, they only got less than 50% of the votes. They got 72% of the Senate seats. And it encourages going further and further to the fringes. And we had, you know, an attempted kidnapping of the governor, and we just saw how that trial played out. But the day that we learned in the Senate about that plot, the Senate Majority Leader walked out of our Senate chambers, walked to the front of our Capitol, and rallied with the same hateful conspiracy theorists that plotted that kidnapping, that came to our chambers fully armed and threatened us, and told them to keep going. That's where we're at right now. And unless we all push back and vote them out of office, it's not going to get any better.
So you've certainly got our attention. How has the response been to your speech on the floor?
I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. This was definitely not something that I wanted to do to go viral. But if the message is that hate won't win, I think we're proving that. And we have to say it loudly and clearly and stand up for those who are being attacked, because one day it might be us. And I know that everything that I felt the day that Lana Tice accused me of being a groomer and sexualizing children is that much worse for a trans kid who is getting attacked every single day, who just wants to go to school and have friends and get through the day. And the response has been overwhelming. And my hope is that other white women like me who are doing okay are the ones to stand up and put an end to this, because it won't unless we do it.
Michigan State Senator Mallory McMorrow, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for speaking
Thanks,
out.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Reverend Sharpton, your current MSNBC co-worker, Joe Scarborough, is my former congressman. And when Joe Scarborough served in the Congress, he had quite a bit to say about your contribution to the national discussion. It was in the 106th Congress that Joe Scarborough filed House Concurrent Resolution 270 entitled Condemning the Racist and Anti-Semitic Views of the Reverend Al Sharpton. Mr. Scarborough's resolution began by saying, whereas the Reverend Al Sharpton has referred to members of the Jewish faith as blood-sucking Jews and Jew bastards. So my question to you is, does Mr. Scarborough's assertion that you said these things, is that true, or did you not say those things?
They are patently untrue. I never said that.
Okay.
And
well,
can I finish my answer?
No, it's actually my time, but you will be able to
Well, I
answer a number
thought
of
you raised the question.
So the next question
Can I
relates
answer
to
the
Mr. Scarborough's
question?
second comment. He says, whereas the Reverend...
Since aspersions were cast on the witness will be permitted to answer.
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Aspersions weren't cast. I asked the witness if
You asked, was it true that I said that?
I can't reclaim my time, Mr. Chairman.
Witness, you will have your time. The witness will be permitted to answer.
You asked me, was that true? And the answer is no, that was not true. And as you know, Mr. Scarborough and I work very closely together. He comes to National Action Network conventions. I think he's a great guy, and we do each other's shows often.
Mr. Scarborough also said...
Excuse me. The gentleman who's the timekeeper will add 30 seconds to Mr. Gates' time.
Thank you,
And
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
The Gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Is it appropriate for a member of the body to personally attack a witness before the body? Or shall I say, can a congressman's words be taken down in the event that he casts aspersions on a witness?
We ask everyone to adhere to rules of decorum. The gentleman will proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Joe Scarborough then wrote, whereas the Reverend Al Sharpton has referred to members of the Jewish faith as white interlopers and diamond merchants. Have you ever referred to members of the Jewish faith as white interlopers or diamond merchants?
No, sir. I referred to one in Harlem, an individual who I didn't even know was Jewish, as an interloper, and said I should never refer to his race. I said that I was against those that were using apartheid diamonds. And when I did a funeral in Crown Heights in '91, because we were boycotting Oppenheimer and those that were selling diamonds from apartheid South Africa.
Thank
in
you,
the
Mr.
same
Scarborough. I'm gonna
sermon,
reclaim
I'm
my
trying
time.
to,
Mr.
may I
Scarborough
finish my answer,
continues-
sir?
No,
Am I allowed to finish my answer?
I'm allowed to
No,
reclaim my time.
You asked a question and I'm answering it.
Yeah, I got a few more.
Well, and I have a few more answers.
I can't wait.
Well, apparently you do because you don't want me to answer.
No, I want to
So
know.
since you raised it, let me finish.
And I
I
have a
also
right to
talked
ask
about
you
people
questions.
snatching
It's a
pocketbooks
by talking
that are in the,
over me. That
I'm
is not how
not
this is gonna work,
filibustering any.
Reverend.
I'm answering your question.
Everyone will suspend, please.
Mr. Chairman, a parliamentary inquiry.
Everyone will suspend.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Gentlelady will state a parliamentary inquiry.
It will be in the form of a inquiry statement. Is it appropriate for a member to do a constant tirade of attacking the witness and then not allowing the witness to answer?
That is not, my personal opinion is that it's not proper, but that is not a proper parliamentary inquiry. The
It's a
gentleman controls
statement,
the time.
statement to the
The
gentleman.
gentleman controls the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Scarborough continued, whereas the Reverend Al Sharpton led a protest in the Crown Heights neighborhood and marched next to a protester with a sign that read, "The white man is the devil." Did you march next to a sign that said?
I have no recollection of that. I've marched in many things where there were signs that I did or did not agree with.
Scarborough
and
continues, whereas the
and
Reverend
I
Al
would
Sharpton's
say
vicious
that if I
verbal
was
and
aware of that, I would have said
I asked him my
that
time
I would
was
not
short, so I
want
have the
to
opportunity
have that
question the
sign.
witness and not just have him continue to.
Well, then you shouldn't ask me a question if you don't want an
I
answer.
want to know if you said them. You could say yes or no. You said
No,
them.
I cannot answer Mr. Chairman on yes or no when he's
I
asking
asked my
me
time
whether or
to be
not
restored. The witness is obviously disrupting the committee.
the witness. First of all, this has nothing to do with policing.
Mr. Chairman.
Since he
right.
wants to,
outrageous.
since he wants to make the subject Joe Scarborough and I, then let me answer it. It had nothing.
Gentlemen.
Last I know, Joe Scarborough nor I are members of the police department or have anything to do with excessive
what
force.
is outrageous-
But I'm loving to engage this if he lets me finish.
What is outrageous is a matter of opinion. The gentleman controls the time.
Mr. Chairman, I asked that a minute be
The
restored.
gentleman controls the time.
So you're not going to restore my time?
No.
Joe Scarborough continues, the Reverend Al Sharpton's fierce demagoguery incited violence, riots, and murder in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
As a
Not
matter of
fire
fact, the
alarm-
New York State did a extensive study on the Crown Heights riots. Said I was not even there until after there was death of Yanko Roosevelt. I was not even called by the family until the day after.
Thank you, Mr.
We
Sharpton.
had
I'm gonna
nothing to
reclaim
do
my
with it. When
time.
I came to
Mr.
Crown
Sharpton, have
Heights,
you ever
I led the
referred-
first nonviolent
Mr.
march
Chairman,
there.
Are you really? All right, fine. Mr. Sharpton, have you ever referred to African Americans who disagree with you as cocktail sip Negroes?
I have.
Have you ever referred to African Americans who
Mr.
disagree
Chairman,
with you?
I have a parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
If a congressperson is persistently questioning a witness about a non-germane matter, is it proper?
I think the gentleman makes a fair point, but the rules provide members with very wide latitude.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Does it violate any rules of decorum for a member to read specifically verbatim from a document filed in the congressional records as a resolution?
The gentleman from Florida may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have you ever referred to African Americans who disagree with you as yellow and then the N-word?
I don't know that I've referred to people as names. I don't know if it's because they disagree with me, but I have said things about blacks and whites. I'm glad you made it clear that I don't only attack whites. Thank you for that.
Have you ever said that? Have you ever referred to African Americans who disagree with you as Negro militants?
I didn't know that was a derogatory statement.
I didn't say it was. Just ask if you used it.
I don't know. I don't recall.
Have you ever said, if the Jews want to get it on, tell them to pin their yarmulkes back and come over to my house?
No, there was a man named Mordecai Levy who had been charged with some terrorist acts who threatened to march on me and several other activists in New Jersey. And he said he was going to come deal with my hairstyle. And I'm referring to his hairstyle. I said for him to pin it and come on. I was not talking about all Jews.
Well, you
no.
said those words.
No, I said about Mordecai Levy.
Have you said, I'm in hell already, I'm in Israel?
Yeah, because I had been threatened that if I came over to deal
one more
with
question.
First of all,
I believe in
I believe that you can deal with the decorum of the Congress, but you cannot disrespect a witness. You cannot answer a question, ask a question, and tell the witness he can't answer the question.
Is permitted to answer a question.
You're welcome to answer them. How about
Well, then let me
last
answer,
one?
sir.
Okay.
Let me answer, because I'm enjoying this. I think that you have.
You're at a committee about policing.
Don't get upset. Calm down. Calm down. You're yelling. Calm down. I think that I'm trying to answer your last question.
Gentleman will be permitted. The time of the gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
The one about offing the pigs. Answer that one.
The witness may answer the question. The time of the gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
The question that he raised, what I was saying was clearly that I have disagreed with blacks and whites. I've used language graphically sometime to do so, some of which I've grown beyond, but none of which shows anything other than I am an equal opportunity attacker. And I'm glad that Joe Scarborough and I both are equal opportunity attackers that now work together.
Mr. Chairman, I ask to be recognized for unanimous consent request.
The gentleman will state his unanimous consent request.
Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to introduce the Scarborough resolution as a part of the committee's permanent record.
I object. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have a motion.
Now that
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I was reviewing your prior answer, Reverend Sharpton. You are cited in a Washington Examiner piece, July 30th, 2019, as having said, if the Jews want to get it on, tell them to pin their yarmulkes back and come over to my house. And in your response to my question, you said you were just referring to one person. So here is my very limited question for you, Reverend. Were you misquoted in this story when you say the Jews and them, referring to a plural group of people rather than one person you seem to have a grievance with?
Well, am I allowed to answer? My name is Sharpton, not Lewandowski. I will answer the question if I'm allowed.
Please.
We know your name, sir. Go ahead and answer.
And you then know that I'm going to answer. I was referring to an incident and a threat to come to my home by Mordecai Levy and to the homes of, I believe, Reverend Daughtry and others. How the Examiner, I think you said, or someone else wrote, I'm not looking at it, so I do not know whether they misquoted me or not. I do know what I said and who I was referring to.
Well, did you say them?
I just said that I'm not looking at the statement. I do not. You're talking about a situation that happened in 1991. If I said them, the, or those, I don't know. I know that incident and I know what I was referring to. And a man threatening to come to our home who had that kind of criminal record. And I had two young children, I think under 5 years old.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Again, I'm not Lewandowski. Let me
No,
talk. I'll
and you
talk.
don't control
I'll
the time.
talk. I'll
So,
testify
as will
before this
I.
committee.
So is it your belief that
If I
you did
said
things
them or
in
not, would that help or
1991?
hurt excessive force of policing?
Well, I think it's pretty significant when someone wants to come and preach to us.
Mr.
about
Chairman,
raising
point of
the federal
parliamentary
standard,
inquiry.
and then-
Mr.
Point
Chairman.
of parliamentary inquiry.
Who
Point of
asked
parliamentary
first?
inquiry.
Someone else did first. The gentleman will state his point of
I don't believe you talk about the people that come
Gentlemen-
before you.
The gentleman will suspend. The gentleman will state his point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Chairman, when a witness is asked a question in a hearing before this Judiciary Committee, do our rules provide that the witness is permitted to answer the question?
The witness is permitted to answer the question.
I have a parliamentary.
But the member controls the time.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Hold on. The member controls the time. If the member judges that the question is answered to his satisfaction, he may go on to another question. The
Parliamentary
gentlelady will state
inquiry.
her point of parliamentary inquiry.
When a witness is attempting to answer the question, is it the rules of this committee that the witness be allowed to answer the question? And is it also in the decorum of this committee to not badger the witness if the witness is attempting to answer the question?
The member, well, there are two answers. The member controls the time. If the member thinks that the question has been answered to his satisfaction, he may cut off the answer and go to a further question. However, it is not permitted to badger a witness. We do afford members considerable latitude, but badgering witnesses is inappropriate, and our committee should not conduct itself in that manner. It is expected that all parties to these proceedings comport themselves with decorum and professionalism, and at all times in a manner that reflects creditably on the House of Representatives. House rules require the chair to maintain order and decorum, and I will do so. The gentleman controls the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ain't having no march. I believe in fighting. Well, fight then. Ain't nobody holding you. I'll off the man. We'll off him. Plenty of crackers walking around here tonight. Did you say those words?
I do not recall saying I will not march. I think for the last 40 years I've marched. I think that you're referring to, and I'm not sure, but I think you're referring to when I was dealing with some people that said that they don't want to march and that they're going to off people. And I told them there are plenty of people walking around that they called a name. They're not offing anybody because I felt that they were just trying to disrupt our asking people to march. So in the context of I was quoting as I said the reference made about I don't want to march.
And astrology and mathematics before Socrates and them Greek homos ever got around to it. Did you say that, Mr. Sharpton?
I talked about African history, and I talked about how we had dealt with astrology as well as mathematics and philosophy and religion in Africa.
But you referred to people as Greek homos, didn't you?
I do not recall how I referred to anyone. And you'd have to cite.
Do you think that your bigoted statements in 1991 are excusable just because they were in 1991?
I think that any statement that I've made that was wrong, I have clearly said that we should not make bigoted statements, including me. I also think that to distort. I think that also to distort.
Have you
You
made
can,
bigoted
you
Will
can
the
ask,
gentleman yield?
you can ask all the questions
Gentleman
you
yield?
want, but I'm going to answer the question.
Will the gentleman
I think-
yield?
statements? When you call Greek homos, when you talk about white crackers, those are bigoted
No,
statements.
I think I made it clear that I was quoting what somebody said.
No, you-
Yelling
that's what
and
you
getting upset is beneath your office. You should calm down.
The gentleman will state his point of order.
Once again, Mr. Chairman, after a sustained attack on the character of a witness that has been called by people on this panel, and that panel then attacks that witness in a sustained, deliberate manner, which is non-germane to the subject at hand, is it appropriate for a member to ask that the offending member's words be taken down?
It is not under the rules appropriate. The time is the gentleman's.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would note these are highly relevant to the issues that we're facing. Reverend Sharpton has come before the House Judiciary Committee
The clock should be running.
as a purported expert on policing, and yet his bigoted statements undermine the bipartisan work we should be doing to ensure that all citizens are able to come together and have safe communities.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. How is this
Gentleman will state his
germane?
point of order.
How is this line of inquiry germane? And if it's not germane, is it appropriate?
To the point, may I speak to the point?
cited Jermaine.
Setting a specific rule that says that this is not allowed, that we can then rule on.
Well, is there such a rule? I don't think we should allow our, Mr. Chairman, we have had a series, we've had a witness who came before us 2 days ago, Mr. Lewandowski, who totally contemptuously dealt with this panel. And now we have a reverse of that. We have one of our members doing the same thing to a witness who we have called. I don't think it is within our best practices to allow our process to get down to the level that we have now sunk. And I'm asking the chairman to, in the wise use of discretion, to rule that the gentleman from Florida's line of inquiry with this specific witness, who he's trying to attack his characters, no question about that, but
I'm reading his own words back.
doing it in a sustained way,
Not you.
and
He
doing
does? I have the time, Mr. Chairman.
and not having
not.
uttered
What
a
is it?
single
Regular order. Is this a point of order? What is
Point of order, Mr. Gates. You don't have the floor.
The gentleman is being heard on the point of order.
not
Will I be
having-
heard on the point of order?
The
Not
gentleman
having-
is being heard on the point of order.
not having uttered a single word of relevance to the issue at hand, is it appropriate for this committee to allow the misuse of this platform to attack the character of a witness? I mean, this is taking our process down to a level that we should never allow it to descend to. And I'm objecting to us wallowing in the mud down here with these comments. I mean, it's not whether or not it's true or false, it's the fact that it's non-germane.
To the point?
The chair will rule on the point. The chair will rule on the point of order. Although the gentleman's comments may be obnoxious, although they may
I object to that. Point of order. That is an improper
although the
characterization of
gentleman's
the member of the
comments
committee.
may be characterized as whatever you want to characterize them as.
I have a point of order that your words be taken down and referred
Oh,
to.
woe is me.
Gentleman,
I pick a fight and
gentleman
now
has
I need
wide-
help.
Under the rules, the gentleman has wide latitude, both on the question of germaneness and on the language that he uses. And unfortunately, under the rules, I cannot overrule him. The gentleman will proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You sold your life story, Mr. Sharpton, to your own charity. How much money did your charity pay you for the rights to tell your story?
Parliamentary inquiry. Mr. Chairman, this is an outrage, and the question is whether you can impugn the motives and or insult or badger the witness or cost or characterize his presence at this
Objection,
table.
The gentlelady was not recognized.
Well, I have a parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady was not recognized. All right. Stop the clock. Just stop. All right, you'll state the parliamentary inquiry.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the gentleman from Georgia made a point about a witness that we had just 2 days ago, which the impugning of the motive, the character destruction was not in the course of our questioning. What I say to our good friend from Florida, that you are now not only not being germane, but you are pointedly attacking the character, and in addition, bringing up information.
It is not.
Well, let me just finish. Bringing up information, it's an inquiry. Bringing up information that is a character destroying. And the question is, in the questioning of a witness, can you use items that refer to the witness's character and demeaning the witness's character? Is that an appropriate line of questioning?
Whether it is an appropriate line of questioning is not relevant. But with respect to the parliamentary inquiry, questioning a witness's character and motives, which may go to ascertaining the credibility to give to the testimony, we have always given very wide latitude, and the answer has to be that I cannot object to that. The gentleman will proceed.
How much money did your charity pay you, you personally, for the right to tell your life story?
My charity owed a certain amount of money to me and asked, could they use that money to have the right to sell any rights to my life, be it documentary, one-man play, or other items that they have already began reaping dividends. They would have had to pay me the same sum anyway because it was owed to me.
Was that sum
so
over
the
$500,000?
answer, can I finish?
Was it over $500,000?
Can I finish? Whatever the
More or
sum
less
was,
than $500,000
the sum, whatever the
charity
sum,
gave you to tell your life story? Because I think most people would see
the
that
charity
as a
again,
straight fraud.
charity again owed me a certain amount of money that
Over
they would have had to
$500,000? I
pay
want an answer.
anyway,
Will you instruct
and
him to
they
tell us
were.
whether or not
I
it was
agreed
more than
to allow
$500,000
them.
or less than $500,000 that his charity paid him for his life story?
Gentleman's time.
I allowed them to use those funds
Chairman, I
to
asked you to
have
instruct the
my
was it
record.
more than $500,000?
Gentleman will suspend. His time has expired. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Now, in the decades since Facebook went public, social media platforms have transformed the face of society, of course. Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt has observed how we are affected by this type of technology, and he joins Hari Srinivasan to discuss what went wrong and how social media could become less corrosive.
Christian, thanks. Jonathan, hi. Thanks so much for joining us again. You have written an article that I think, last time I checked on The Atlantic, it is still the #1 most read. It's titled, Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid. We will unpack that, and you put social media at the center of a lot of it. Now, before we get to sort of the politics and the impacts of social media on our institutions and life, I also want to know something that you follow pretty closely, and that's the research of what social media is doing to the minds of children, the behaviors of children, and maybe how that now contributes to this larger essay and larger topic that you're talking about. So what do we know about the research on how social media is affecting kids today?
Right. Well, thanks, Hari. Thanks so much for having me on. And I think that is the best place to start, because that's where I think the evidence is clearest. And actually, the kids were the canaries in the coal mine. My article in The Atlantic is about how something changed, something fundamentally changed in the nature of the social universe in the early 2010s. And everything got weird and kind of stupid after that. And we see it clearly, most clearly with the kids. All kids have been on screens all the time. When I was a kid, when you were a kid, we watched too much television. We couldn't take the television with us to school or into the bedroom. And something changed when kids got smartphones, and it's not just the phone, it's especially social media. The girls went right for the visual platforms, Instagram and Tumblr. The boys went more for YouTube and video games. And at the time, people said, well, you know, maybe this is good for them to have so much stimulation. But actually what happened beginning in 2012 was that rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm, and suicide all began going up. I mean, it wasn't a gradual thing. It was like they were sort of stable until 2012. And then it's like a hockey stick. They're now, most of them are 100% high. We've had a doubling of the rates of suicide, self-harm, depression, and anxiety. So that has really drawn me in, because this, I think, is a national emergency, and one that is tractable. And I've been studying this in depth to try to figure out what is the evidence that social media actually is a contributor, and there is a fair amount now.
Now, you know, people are going to question that and say, well, where there's correlation and there's causation, we even have the Surgeon General putting out a warning. I mean, this is something that, you know, we are used to on the equivalent scale of saying that tobacco is a bad idea to consume.
That's right. So there's a long history of moral panics, especially around technology. And I've been engaging with other psychologists who say that I'm fomenting a moral panic. And they're right to be concerned about that, because most of the previous times we freaked out about technology, it hasn't been actually anything. This time, I believe, is different for a couple of reasons. The first is that there's never been a hockey stick graph like that sudden upturn in mental health problems. So this time is different. Two is that the timing is exactly what you'd expect for social media. It's not a gradual thing. It's not like something changed and then something else kind of changed. As soon as most kids get on social media, and right then, the very next year, rates of depression and anxiety start going up. And then a final kind of data is the kids themselves say it. I mean, when we were growing up, we didn't say, yeah, television is making us all crazy. Mom and dad, do something. But if you talk to the kids, and Facebook, Instagram, they talk to the kids, and guess what? They say, yep, Instagram is what's making us depressed and anxious.
As you lay out that there is this research now showing the impacts of social media on an entire generation of young people, your article and your essay talks about this sort of stupefaction. And you kind of lay out the evidence, but break it down for us in kind of a couple of big parts. How do we measure the general stupidity, so to speak, the increase of that stupidity, and then what's causing it?
There have been hundreds of articles about how bad social media is, and it's destroying this and that. I think what I'm trying to add here is, as a social psychologist, I study morality and politics, and I've become a big fan of the philosopher John Stuart Mill, who said, "He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that." That is, in order to really understand anything, we have to look at it from multiple perspectives. We have to have different viewpoints pushing against each other. That's what we do in universities. And that's what we've always done in my career as a professor until around 2014, 2015. And all of a sudden, it became much more hazardous to question. If you even tweeted about a study that challenged the received wisdom on race, gender, transgender, there are a couple of sacred issues. If you even suggested that there was another side, huge social sanctions would rain down on you on Twitter and other platforms. And here's the key thing. When people feel even a little bit of intimidation, when they think, if I speak up, terrible things are going to happen to me of unknown size, like it could be nothing, it could be 1,000 tweets. It's that little bit of intimidation. That's what makes people go silent. And when critics go silent, the group gets stupid. That's the central point of my article. We've had polarization for a long time. I mean, the country was incredibly polarized in the 1960s. It's not that this is a new thing. What's new is this new dynamics brought to us by social media, and especially Twitter, that we're not shooting the other side so much anymore. We're shooting the moderates on our own side. And so what happened in the early to mid 2010s is the moderates on the left and right begin to go silent, and the extremes get super empowered. And at that point, I think the Republican Party goes off the rails one way. It's not that the Democratic Party went off the rails. It's not, there's an asymmetry. It's not on the left, it's not the Democratic Party. It's the fact that almost all of our major cultural institutions, universities, media, the arts, museums, K-12 education, almost all of these are dominated by progressives for a variety of reasons, most of which are not particularly bad. There are different kinds of people in different professions. But if the left dominates in these industries, and then all of a sudden we start shooting the moderates, then the institution gets stupid. And we see, for example, the imposition of policies like really, DEI policies, diversity training. These don't work. I mean, there's no evidence that these work, and there's some evidence that these things backfire. But yet, institution after institution does the exact same thing over and over again. And when I talk to the leaders, they know this doesn't work. They know what they're doing is foolish, but they have no choice. That's what I mean by structural stupidity, that our institutions, which are crucial for healthy democracy, are no longer able to do their job, achieve their mission, and make intelligent choices.
When you say that the diversity initiatives don't work, there's going to be a lot of people that push back immediately and say, look, this is trying to address or redress inequalities and inequities in the workplace that have been structural, that have given people a leg up. And what's wrong with that? How do we know that these don't work?
Okay. Well, to be clear, I'm not saying that trying to improve diversity doesn't work. I'm saying diversity training, formal diversity training. That's an area where there is a lot of research, and there's not really any research to show that it works. So that's just one example of a policy widely implemented, tens of billions of dollars spent every year, huge amounts of time, and for no good reason. And there's some evidence that sometimes they backfire. As for the larger issue of improving equality, improving opportunity, I'm very supportive of that. I'm a social scientist. I want us to do things that will actually work. But what happens is we approach problems where we know what the answer is, regardless of the data. We know that the answer is certain kinds of prejudice or certain kinds of structural factors. We know that. And if anyone says otherwise, they're in big trouble. And then it's as though we say, like, well, here's the tree. We're going to bark up this tree. That's the only tree we're allowed to bark up. And sometimes that's the right tree. But social science is complicated. All these problems are complicated. There are usually multiple factors feeding in to any kind of observed outcome difference. And when social scientists and policymakers are told, you must bark up that tree, well, usually they're barking up the wrong tree.
You know, you write in here that the connective tissue that binds a lot of our institutions together is three things: social capital, strong institutions, and shared stories. And you essentially say that social media tears at every one of those three things.
We have this idea that that diversity is good, and diversity has many good effects, but diversity also makes things come apart. And so for a large secular nation like the United States, you have to look at what are the forces holding us together? What are the things blowing us apart? Now, diversity makes group more creative when you have good norms, when things are well structured. We have to think really carefully about how to get the benefit from America's diversity. But it's hard to do because if you critique it, you could get in big trouble. Now, in terms of what it actually holds a country together, traditionally, it's shared gods, shared blood, and shared enemies. That's what nations usually have used. So we have a challenge, and it is a great experiment. And when social media came in, when everybody was on social media beginning around 2012, 2013, when it gets hyper-viralized, the ability to have any shared understanding of what we're doing shatters. Social media allows us to participate in micro stories that kind of bubble up and then are gone. There is no ability to have a common understanding of what we're doing. Not that we ever are all one nation and all on the same page, but there's a qualitative change when it's like, here's the story of the day. So there's no possibility for shared stories in the age of social media, widely shared stories. There's a huge decline of trust in each other and trust in institutions. And here I'm drawing on recent social science, political science research showing that social media generally leads to a decline of trust. Social media is incredibly powerful for tearing things down, and that can be a good thing in a dictatorship, but it's very bad at building things up. And in an ailing democracy like ours, where our institutions need to be improved, not ripped apart, it generally has made things worse.
So what are the implications if we are in a perpetual state of outrage? How does that influence what our society looks like?
Democracy is hard. The founding fathers knew that. They knew that democracy is unstable and generally blows up. So they gave us a republic with democratic features. And the crucial thing to keep a democracy running is you have to have good institutions. You have to have good democratic institutions and good epistemic or knowledge-generating institutions. And we had those for a while in America. Those are now declining. What happens if you try to have a democracy without good institutions? And I think the answer is Latin America. Latin American countries have been trying for 200 years to have on and off with dictatorships and democracies. I fear that if we don't take major action now, if we don't get serious about saying, stop the fighting over stupid little things, we've all got to, the ship is sinking. If we don't do anything, we're going to become a Latin American democracy with a lot more political violence, a lot more instability, many more constitutional crises. This, I fear, is where we're headed unless we can really change what we're doing.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of what are the changes that we can do. I mean, sometimes when you're mentioning kind of things that lead to political polarity, especially in social media, I also see that playing out in electoral politics.
Once we appreciate that we're running our democracy outside the range of sustainability, if we keep going as we are, I believe we're going to fail as a country. So what do? I think there are three buckets of reforms, three things we have to do. And the first is to harden democratic institutions, as you're saying. The second bucket is we've got to change social media so that's less toxic. And the third bucket is we've got to change what we're doing to children so that they grow up better able to handle this crazy divided democracy. So on the democratic reform bucket, I think is the most important reform we could possibly have. And that is, it's completely insane to have closed party primaries. No other country does this. To have a system in which our Congress people, even state legislators as well, in which they don't have to worry about what their constituents think. Their constituents don't matter unless they vote in the primary. So if all of what you say and do is to appeal to the 5 or the 10% of the people in your state or your district who actually are going to turn out and vote in the Republican primary or the Democratic primary, you have to be more radical. Most of our leaders, our Congress people, are good people. They're generally smart people. Most of them are there to make the country better. But so many of them, when they get there, they find it's impossible. It's impossible to do good. They get sucked into the game. We've got to change the game, especially because we expect things are going to get even worse. The pressures on them are going to get even worse. The polarization is going to get even worse.
Let's talk a little bit about that basket of how to reform social media, especially in the context of children and what's happening with this new generation.
One thing it's very frustrating to me is there's so much going on with social media, and most of the action is in the architecture. It's all about the viral dynamics. That's what changed. That's what we have to fix. Unfortunately, all of the discussion is about content moderation. But one thing we learned from Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, is that content moderation only gets a tiny fraction of what's out there. And that's only in English. In most of the languages of the world, there is no content moderation. Facebook has nobody who speaks most of the world's languages. So what we need to do to reform social media is not more or less content moderation. It's change the architecture so that it doesn't take stupid, nasty stuff and blow it up to millions of people. People have always been posting or writing stupid, nasty stuff. The problem with social media isn't that. It's that it takes stuff and makes it hyper-viral within days. So we need architectural reforms. Social media companies that are large, that affect democracy and children, should have to know their customers. So that means identity authentication. You can still post under a fake name, but to be able to open an account on a platform that has Section 230 protection and viral dynamics, that's not a constitutional right. To have those viral dynamics. To open an account, the platform should be able to verify that you're a real person, not a bot or a Russian agent, that you're in a particular country, and that you're old enough to be using the platform. If we do those 3 things, most of the accounts would get closed down because they're mostly fake or troll accounts. And then people who make death threats and rape threats can't just open 10 more accounts with a different name.
Do you think that we have the appetite to be able to make some of these changes? Because the structures that are in place do reward the people who are in power right now.
I do agree that when you look out at how things are going, the chance for reform looks grim. But there are a lot of hopeful points. So here's one. The U.S. Congress, I think, is hopeless. I don't expect it to do anything for us ever, really. But the UK Parliament is actually doing great work. The UK Parliament is implementing a child-appropriate and age-appropriate design code. And it turns out the platforms, it's very hard for them to have different platforms in different countries. So if the UK can do something good, and they are, that's going to put a lot of pressure on the platforms. California is now considering, actually this coming week, California is considering applying the age-appropriate design code from the UK to California. And if so, California does it, the platforms are going to have to adapt. So there are ways around the U.S. Congress and its complete paralysis. In terms of other reforms, Alaska has adopted this final 4 voting system, but they did it by referendum. Now, in general, I'm not a fan of referendums, but because the political process is so broken and the party with the more power is never going to agree to a reform. So in states that have a referendum, I think this is very popular. Everyone's fed up with what's going on. So by referendum, any state could change its voting system. So I think there are ways. And then the third thing is, even though I've been focusing on structural reforms, there's a lot that we can each do as individuals. And I wish I'd said this in the essay. I keep kicking myself that I didn't close on this more inspiring note. But the biggest thing is we can just all take it easier on each other. Once we understand that we're all being driven crazy by this stuff, it's like we're all being fed poison gas. And so when people do extreme things and stupid things, don't get mad at them. Don't tweet how terrible they are. Just ignore it. Just ignore it. We have to go easier on each other if we're going to make it as a country.
NYU Professor Jonathan Haidt, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Harry.